How are you? Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Bibbs, your host of Who Are You and What Are You Doing Here? We are a podcast where we explore those questions in whatever capacity we feel like. Today we are joined by Nikki Ray Bose. She is the owner, the founder, the leader of Reunify Yoga. It's a lovely yoga studio in Ocean Beach, California. Ocean Beach is a neighborhood in San Diego. It's absolutely incredible. It is one of the most unique communities and spaces that I have ever been to, certainly in this country. And I'm so thankful that Nikki offered us so much of her time today to let us in on really the creation process of Reunify and her intentions and beliefs that really are the backbone of Reunify and are just absolutely so palpable on the receiving end when you're actually in the studio. Through Reunify, she has created, in the truest sense of the words, a community-based yoga studio. She's originally from Chicago, but she moved to California about 15 years ago. She left a more corporate job to pursue something that felt more in alignment with her own heart, and Reunify was really organically born out of that transition. And it's such a beautiful story. And yeah, I talk about this in the actual episode, but I have only talked to Nikki for maybe 30 seconds, a minute total. And she just has such a grounding presence and is filled with so much wisdom, as we all are. But I feel like she is so tapped into it and just so open with her learnings and her beliefs. And it's incredibly inspiring for anybody that is, for anybody. But if you are a yoga teacher, a yoga studio owner, or employee, if you are like me and just really want to foster connection and community in a way that feels true to you and that feels good and kind, please do listen to this episode. Let me know what you think, as always. And thank you again to Nikki for coming on. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it so much. These podcast interviews end up going one of two ways, it seems. Either I know the person super duper well and I'm like kind of anticipating what they're going to say next because we've like sort of talked about it, or I know them not at all. And you're definitely like part of that second group, because I realized I think I only have talked to you maybe for like 60 seconds total. But yeah, I'm so grateful that you're here today, and I'm just so excited to learn more about you and Reunify and how it kind of came to be. I know we were talking about buying property, but in the spirit of having like a little longer of a warm up, I feel like I'm always a little bit like buzzy on Zoom. So just in the spirit of like warming up, banter, easy question, how has your week been? How was that? You had another like chai and vibe on Sunday, right? How was that just generally?
Yeah, Sunday. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm like very committed to fostering a sense of community at the yoga studio. So that's why I love those events. No matter how busy I am, I'm going to be there. I'll never, like when you have your own business, you can like hire other people to do different things. Like that is like our chai hours, our weekly chai hours, and the community chai vibe events I'll always be a part of
Mm.
because I receive so much from them. And so that's what Sunday was, just like me receiving, and my like baby was there, and everyone takes turns holding my baby, and just like I get to just enjoy and walk around, and like there was delicious paella there and sip chai, and there was live music. So yeah, it was a pretty crowded one, and it just felt really good. I knew almost every single person there, which is just it's
Yeah.
magical to be held in those kind of spaces.
Yeah, that's so magical. Oh my gosh. For anybody that doesn't know, you are the owner, founder, leader of, are those all correct terms?
Yeah.
Cool. Of Reunify Yoga, which is a yoga studio in Ocean Beach, which is a neighborhood in San Diego, California, so West Coast. And there are so many yoga studios out there, and all of them are special in their own way. But Reunify, I've been to so many yoga studios. I've never experienced a yoga studio like Reunify. I love the energy of the place, even from the 30 seconds that I talked to you before one of your classes. I just loved your energy. It like felt grounding to talk to you, even just in that short exchange. And of course, in like the class that followed. But yeah, I just like in so many ways have felt like Reunify is different. And so I'm just really, I know I keep saying this, but like intrigued to learn more. So, in that spirit, as you probably already know, the name of the podcast is Who Are You and What Are You Doing Here? So, I always like to just start with those two questions. And when I ask the questions, I mean them more so in like the big picture general sense as opposed to like what are you doing right in this moment. But yeah, if I ask you those questions, what kind of comes to mind?
Oh my God. The first thing I want to do is go on a philosophy rant, but we'll start with the physical plane of who am I and what am I doing here.
Okay, we
Uh,
can do both.
so I'm I'm Nikki Ray Bose, and I am wow. I have so many different facets of who I am, especially now that I'm a new mom. That's very much so like in the forefront of like what my like human skin suits are. But prior to that, I would probably tell people I was a surfer. And prior to that, I was a molecular biologist.
Oh,
Prior to that,
wow.
I was a Chicago city girl. So I have a lot of different facets to who I am and what my story is and how it has unraveled into this. But yeah, so I guess who I am, and I don't first things first express that I'm a yoga teacher. That is not a.
Mm,
It's interesting because uh, Eckhart Tolle in Power of Now, he talks about how like when we really drop into the present moment and ask who are we, all of those things that I just listed fall away.
mm-hmm.
Um, but even even when I hold on to my list, I wouldn't be. First thing I would say would not be like yoga teacher for
Mm-hmm.
some reason because I guess I think I know the reason, which is when I hold those spaces, I still very much show up as myself. I don't like put on this yoga teacher role or the yoga teacher
Yeah.
voice. I'm deeply connecting with my students and offering anecdotes from my own life because I'm just like right here in the trenches with all of y'all. Like, I'm not trying to pretend like I'm not in any way. So I think that's why, and yoga teacher, sharing that as an identity always felt kind of like off for me because I don't want to create any kind of hierarchy. I very much so feel like a student to my own teachings, the own things, the very things that are coming out of my mouth. And other times things come out of my mouth, I'm like, who said that and like
Mm-hmm.
who hijacked my physical vessel, because I needed to hear that. I'll be like saying something, I'm like, who said that, and I'll like tear up while it's interesting. So who am I? That's a long-winded answer to that. And
That's
what am I
perfect.
doing here? Thank you. And what am I doing here? I am like, I feel really strongly about fostering, as I said in our little warm up, a strong sense of community, and particularly a community rooted in selfless service. Sanskrit term for that is seva. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that yoga is a path that can create community and can create an understanding of why selfless service is such a powerful practice. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's what I'm doing here. I do think I'm here on this earth creating community, whatever that looks like, and inspiring people to connect with who they really are through serving others.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. That's so powerful. And just for anybody that might be wondering, myself included, um, how would you describe selfless service? Like, what exactly does that mean to you?
Okay, so um, selfless service can be this grandiose thing where, like for example, Reunify organizes trips down to Mexico. I used to go very often before I got pregnant and had a babe. And we basically show up and support Sharda Yoga Center, which is a female run Tijuana run nonprofit that provides movement medicine for different orphanages down in Tijuana. So we
Mm-hmm.
just show up, we're like, okay, tell us how we can serve. Um, and we go to those communities and ask how we can best serve. And also part of my YTT, I lead a yoga teacher training every year, 200 hour and now a 300 hour, and always include community service within the training. So we sit down at the beach and serve breakfast to anyone and whoever wants to come through. We also go
Mm-hmm.
work, volunteer on the sage farm. So like those are like bigger examples of like what selfless service can be. Like how can you show up for others and expect nothing in return? You're not saying
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, pay me, or like, of course everyone gets the feel good feelings. That's part of it. And then I would say there are also subtler versions of selfless service, and knowing that you're offering those, like a smile to a stranger as you walk down the
Mm-hmm.
street, or holding space for someone who needs it in that moment, without expecting some kind of uh, gain in the other direction. I think those are all examples of selfless service.
Totally. Such good examples. Thank you for sharing that. This always happens to have like a beautiful list of like succinct questions. And then as soon as people start talking, I'm like, I need to ask you off script questions. So I have been thinking a lot about capitalism and living in the US and really just like our modern world and how, at least in this current reality, it appears, at least feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, at least in your experience, but like we need money in order to survive. And the way that you're speaking sounds so, it is so ideal. And I'm like, yes, I like in theory, I want to do that too. And if we exclusively did that, there's like a very, I think, high possibility that we like potentially wouldn't have our needs met financially or otherwise. And what's
Mm,
so interesting to me about Reunify is you bring that selfless spirit and evidently are functioning as a business in the US. So I'm like, how do you do both and stay fully genuine and authentic? You know what I mean? Because I
totally.
honestly feel like some studios, this is going to sound so harsh and jaded. I feel like some studios, in an effort to survive, like kindness is more so their marketing practice and approach as opposed to like I'm not sure how much of it is good marketing and that's like how what they've chosen as their way to like draw people in versus it's genuine, it's authentic. Is this question making sense and or making me
Yeah.
sound like icky?
No. I think it's a good question. And your question was basically how are we balancing both? And
Yes.
here's my answer. We have to charge people for memberships and class packs and whatever it is to run as a studio. But what I try to do is I try to keep I am constantly checking the market, and I try to keep us on the lower end of that pricing because I know what my clientele is, and I'm not trying to dig deep in people's pockets. It's just not my it's not what yoga is about at all. Although yoga has deeply rooted itself in capitalism these days. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that was a side tangent. So that's one of the ways in which I do that. And I also, when anyone comes up to me and says they cannot afford my membership, class packs, trainings, anything, we always figure something out. I have, I think, 20 to 25 members that are fully trade, and they usually, all of our desk staff is trade. And we have people
Mm-hmm.
who clean indoor, outdoor space. I have people who've traded some of their greatest gifts and passions for like supporting half of the training. We also do scholarships. I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
think you were at one Chai and Vibe, right? So we do
Mm-hmm.
raffles every Chai and Vibe to offer scholarships for our YTT. So like, yes, we collect money from people who have it because we need money to pay the rent and to pay our
Mm-hmm.
staff. Um, and we also give whenever we can, whatever we can. And I'm really try to stick to that. I've
Yeah.
never I would like to think I haven't denied anyone because of financial reasons. I think sometimes people don't come to me and don't bring that to me, and then that's
Mm-hmm.
why they get denied from the practice of yoga. But I think it's a huge part of decolonizing the practice because there's just no denying the fact that I'm a white woman offering something that is from another country and from another tradition, and to create some sort of reciprocity. I have learned that making it affordable for everyone and anyone is one way that I can help repair any damage I am doing and continuing to offer this as my dharma and what feels like my craft.
Mm-hmm. Totally. That's so beautifully said. Oh, I love it so much. I'm forcing myself to go back to my script for a second because I want to make
So
sure I ask you this question. I want to back up for a second. What were you like as a kid? Is my main question. And like, what were you known for? And who were your biggest influences? Because I want to, yeah, I'm no, because
that
that's my
is
question.
That's crazy because I was just having lunch with my stepdad and I was like, yeah, I'm about to do this podcast. He's like, what kind of questions do they ask? I don't know. He's like, do they ask about your childhood? I'm like, I never talk about my childhood on these podcasts. And then you literally said the
That's so
question.
funny. And
That's
you know what's
nuts.
funny? I just said I'm going to go back to my script and I'm looking for it and I took it off. I don't actually have it on my script. I was just like wanting to ask it. Um, so yeah, feel free to like, you can pass on any question if you're not comfortable sharing, but just
No,
whatever
no,
you do feel comfortable.
I was a spunky, chunky little kid. I
Mm-hmm.
was very chunky and very insecure about it. But my mask I put on to kind of ease that insecurity was very outgoing and playful and fun. And I really liked to connect to a lot of different friend groups. And my mom just told this story the other day, like for the whole year of either kindergarten or first grade, I like had to wear a hat every single day. Like I had some like weird things where I was like, I will wear a hat every day this year. And they had to like
Love
sit me in
it.
the back of the class. I'm like, I wore a hat every day for all of like first grade, whatever it was. Weird shit. So I was very social, outgoing, and insisted upon like a certain dressing a certain way and had a lot of willpower, a lot of vigor. And I was raised by a single mom. So I think that was part of it, part of like I was very tapped into my strength and my independence in
Mm-hmm.
witnessing her and her strength.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so powerful. That's so interesting. And then how did you don't have to go into like the entire like your entire history, but just generally how did reunify come to be? Like what was your vision? Where did it come from?
Mm,
Yeah.
okay. So I had been working as a molecular biologist for 5 years and teaching yoga on the side. I would work full time and then go teach at a local studio in town. And then eventually I was like, I'm leaving this job and I'm going to go study in India. So I quit, and which was a big deal because I was making solid money and it was hard to walk away from that. And I had nothing really to turn to. I was like, I didn't know I was going to open up a brick and mortar just then, but I just knew I had to
Mm-hmm.
leave. My heart wasn't in it anymore, working in the lab. So then I was already married at the time too, and I told my husband I was like, I need to go on this solo journey. And so I went to India, did my second training there, and then I traveled for 5 months and did a lot of volunteer work while I was traveling. And but not right away. At first, I was just like going to every temple, consuming, 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 doing the thing that we're bred to do in our culture. And then I started to feel empty, and I realized I was missing that piece of serving the places I went to, going to the places and asking like, how can I be of service? Do you know any place that needs volunteers, whatever? And so, yeah, I ended up volunteering in Myanmar and other countries, but that was particularly formative. And there, I started having the epiphany that I never wanted to leave. I wanted to stay there and give all my time. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in leaving, I made a little promise to myself that I would send back whatever money I could. And so I came back here, formed Reunify as a traveling donation based class, and would give
Wow.
something like, I don't know, 50 to 70% of all my donations. It was not an intelligent financial thing to do because I had quit my job. But like 50 to 70% of donations I would send back to Tabarwa, the place where I volunteered. And that's where the idea of Reunify kind of formed. Because as you might or might not know, we have Save memberships. And so people can
Mm-hmm.
give a couple extra dollars, and we collect from all of our members that do that and give to different nonprofits each financial quarter. So it started out kind of rooted in that idea that I wanted to establish a yoga studio or yoga community that gave back. And then we took it further in those selfless service trips
Mm-hmm.
when we can organize them. So I guess that's a very short version of how I developed Reunify.
Yeah. That's so cool. And I don't know how else to ask this, but the very simple question coming to mind is you've mentioned like selfless service and even everything you just described is very much in line with that. My question is why? Like why are you so passionate about this?
Because I realized that yoga is union, right? It means to yoke. And you'll
Mhm.
hear teachers say it, we are one, we're all one. But to really give your time to someone else, to give it up completely, to give your action, to give your sweat, your whatever it is, your life, to give moments in your life up to someone else in service of someone else, is to acknowledge that truth that they are you and you are them. And in giving to them, you're giving to yourself. And I'm putting that in words now, but I viscerally, I feel that in I somatically, every part of me, every cell in my body feels that when I really show up for another person,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's in some service trip or just for another friend, and I'm really showing up for them. And so that's why I'm passionate about it. It's also one of the paths of yoga. And, when we karma yoga, and when yoga was brought over here to the West, a lot of that has been forgotten. It's just like, okay, how can we perfect down dog? How do we get these physical postures nailed? But we really tap into the essence of what this practice is by weaving selfless service into what we do as
Mm-hmm.
yogis.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so beautiful how you talk about yoga and yoga philosophy. And what's interesting to me is I have never felt at Reunify like it's at all. What do I want to say? This happens every interview, and then I just like cut it right out and I make it look like it's a seamless experience. But anyway, I have been to like organizations, businesses, even studios, like fitness studios in general, where there is a strong kind of like philosophy or foundational belief that is like driving it. I guess that's probably the case with most places. And what I found is it's really easy, I think, for those environments to reflect those like foundational beliefs in such a way that the environment feels culty is the word coming to mind, or like the beliefs feel almost like dogmatic or like religious, like I need to believe what the teacher is saying, or else like how do you keep the environment so open, so free, because that's very much how I felt in all the classes, while also like living out your purpose and beliefs so strongly.
I think there's two ways in which I do that. One, when I'm actually directly teaching, like in the middle of a asana practice that I'm teaching, awesome. Because, I'm teaching philosophy. I'm teaching a lot of different things in my 1 hour classes. But I think what I try to do is I offer philosophy. And then I also say things like, but also if you just want to tune into your breath today, you can totally ignore me. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think I try to offer a lot of invitations and a lot of opt-outs for
Yeah.
folks. And also when I directly address emotions, I say you could be feeling angry, you could be feeling anxious, maybe you feel joyful, and none of this relates to you. So I really try to imagine that this room that I'm teaching is full of beings, and I don't know their stories. I don't know the kind of stuff that luggage they're carrying. And I try to remember that every time I teach, and give as many perspectives and as many opt outs as I possibly can. And
Mm-hmm.
then also, my staff is very diverse in their backgrounds and in their ways of teaching. I don't know how many different teachers you took, but like the kind of philosophy Ashley DeLuna offers versus me is completely different. And I'm intentional with my staff and saying, please be yourself 100%. Don't try to fake anything. Like if teaching from the sutras doesn't resonate from you, don't teach from it. Like teach with what feels right in your heart and teach from your heart, because that is what people receive, is like your heart's
Mm-hmm.
words. So I think that is also it. It's like that, yeah, I have this vision for Reunify, but if my teachers kind of stray from it in their own ways, like I'm open. And, there's never just one way.
Right. Yeah. It's so true. Oh my gosh. I feel so inspired. I really very much want to be like a connector and community builder myself. So this is just selfishly an incredible inspirational conversation for me. I've heard people say, I think I've seen it online, that like people have literally moved to Ocean Beach for Reunify, like because they want to be a part of the community. I imagine there are like maybe factors beyond that. But like myself included, I'm like, I want to go back to Ocean Beach. And a big reason is because I'm like, oh, Reunify's there, which then it just like sets the tone for the whole location and experience and whatever. Did you realize? I guess this is like, I don't even know why I'm asking. This is like a yes or no question. But did you know you were creating like such a unique, special
No,
place?
no,
The answer is no.
no,
What
no.
were you thinking? Were you?
I was just not thinking at all. I was not
Wow.
thinking at all. I was in the best. That was probably the most aligned I've ever been in my life. way more than I am now. And I knew it was what I needed to do. And I followed the breadcrumbs and I did it. And it just turned out that way. And I called upon all the relationships I had developed to build Reunify. Like, I didn't have money when I started Reunify. Like, it was just like,
Mm-hmm.
so when I opened up shop, I only had a little bit of savings left after those travels. And so I reached out to everyone I knew in the community. I had been in OB 8, 9 years. And I said, okay, I'll give you free yoga if you paint this mandala. I'll give you free yoga if you put up these plants here. My neighbor Robert and I painted the entire place, but it took us like six
Wow.
days because we had no idea what we're doing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just flowed with it, and I had already created community here, and I tapped into the community I'd already created to build it. So I guess once you, like, one, drop in the flow, and two, like, if the foundation of the business is community, like, I guess I could have assumed that it would blossom into more community, but I wasn't thinking
Mm-hmm.
about any of that. I was just
Right.
doing what felt right. And that was hard because it was hard to leave my other yoga space, my other yoga community, but it was also, it just felt right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so incredible. I feel like I just keep complimenting you and Reunify this whole time. But there's just so many good things to say. But I feel like Reunify is um it feels like the closest thing I've experienced to like true communal living beyond like going to the full extreme of like living on a commune or something, which I think is just so cool. And I actually live in Chicago. I don't think I realized you were from Chicago or you
You
used
didn't
to live
know that?
there.
Yeah.
No. Where
Yeah.
in Chicago?
I grew up Addison 11,
Okay, I don't think I know where that is.
Lakeview, Roscoe Village area.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I was born in California, but moved there. My mom took us over there when I was 2, and I lived there 2 to 18.
Wow, okay. So cool.
Mm.
So you didn't really, going back to my last question, you didn't like fully know what you were creating when you were creating it. For anybody like myself that wants to build community, not necessarily in the exact same way, but just generally build like true communal connection, what would your advice be?
Yeah, slow down to connect with people. Like, when I surf, I talk to people in the water. When I'm at the farmer's market, I pause and talk to everyone I even just kind of know. I'm like, how's it going? And just, I really see everyone as a reflection of me. And I have learned so much through connection with other folks and through just listening and having deep conversation with other people. And so, yeah, slowing down and connecting people is what built my business. It's why I felt like I had strong enough contacts to reach out and help me build Reunify. It's also why I think people stick around as my students. Like, I've some people come to Reunify, been my students for all 10 years I've been teaching. And
Mm-hmm.
it's because I love them and I really
Mm-hmm.
care about how they're doing in their lives. So I think if you really want to create community, it's just about the time for those individual connections. If one of my
Yeah.
students wants to stop for coffee, I go and have coffee with them. One of my students has a podcast and they want me on their podcast, I go on it. You know, like, it's forming connection.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful. Oh my gosh. I really am so inspired. It's just confirming like what I feel like I've been reminded of lately, which is like connection is always available to us. And it's so easy, at least I find in Chicago and with COVID, to forget that and to, I guess, do the opposite of inviting connection in and just kind of putting your head down and like doing your thing day to day and then complaining about a lack of community.
Yeah.
So, anyway, thank you for sharing that. It's wild to me. I mean, it seems like you truly do everything together. Like, it does feel very like familial. You do these like chai and vibe things, which for anyone that doesn't know is, I don't know how you would describe it, like an artist's market of
Mhm.
sorts, but it's like a communal event. Yeah, there's food, people are hanging out. You obviously have the yoga classes, the teacher training. It seems like you literally like party together. Like,
No, we do. We throw raves too. Oh, we do. And we surf together. I just surfed with 2 of my students right after I taught. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. I'm
And was
so
that
grateful for it.
all, I imagine, just all part of your vision of like everyone is welcome and,
Yeah. Yeah.
or was
That
it?
is what I want. That is what I wanted for it, but I had no idea to the extent of it. I really
Mm,
didn't. But now I do see it, and I think it's beautiful. And the
yeah.
cool thing is like a lot of people who come to Reunify are also starting their own little businesses, and now
Yeah.
we've just become this network of businesses all supporting each other and investing in each other. And yeah, it's pretty fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever, do you ever run into your own ego. If I were you, I feel like I would just think I'm the shit. Like maybe too much so.
Actually teach an integrity for both my 200-hour and for the 300-hour training. I teach
Yeah.
an integrity of a yoga teacher lecture,
Uh-huh.
and I teach about how to maintain your integrity because that is totally something that happens. Like there's like this inflation of ego that can happen if you're just not cognizant of like the way you receive compliments. And I'm very conscientious and very aware when people are saying like, oh my gosh, reunify is amazing, reunify is amazing. I'm just always remembering in my heart, and like really my immediate internal response is like, I am just a part of reunify. Like
Mm-hmm.
every single person who's involved, every teacher, every student that comes, like no one shows up to my class, if no one shows up to try and vibe, there's no reunify. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just see myself as like just a tiny piece in the bigger puzzle, and I'm constantly reminding myself of that. But I went through
Yeah.
my egotistical phase like before I started reunify. When I was
Okay.
like having full yoga classes, I was like, oh my God, I'm such a sick yoga teacher, you know? And then then you start your own business and you have classes where no one shows up to, and then you
Yep.
wake up. You wake up,
Yeah.
you know, I when I did my donation based reunify, I would set up on the bay and sometimes one or two people would come, and I was teaching in a boutique studio and 50 people were there, and I had to like really process that
Mm-hmm.
spiritual ego and be like, okay, she's there.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so real. Yeah, that's such a big lesson for me. I feel like I'm still learning. Like success or failure, neither are a measure of worth at all.
Mm-mm.
Um, yeah, totally. So we've been talking a ton about the positives of reunify, and I wonder if you ever run into situations where I'm thinking of like an actual family, right, or even a business. Like inevitably there is, I imagine, conflict and yeah, like relational challenges. I don't know if you ever, especially when you're hiring people and even just like attendees in class, do you ever find people that are somehow like not aligned, or like what's the question I'm trying to ask? Like how do you deal with challenges relationally when you have such a close knit community and are so welcoming?
Okay. Ooh, let's see how deep we want to go on this. Okay, let's start surface value and then we'll go a little deeper.
Okay.
Because I'm open to being vulnerable if you're open to taking the time. But
Yeah,
on
sure.
a surface level, it can definitely be hard to, because Reunify is a small space and a lot of yoga teachers come to practice there. And
Mm-hmm.
so I can't hire everyone. It's just not, I can't. I wish I could. I wish I could
Yeah.
open up a bunch of studios and hire as many as people are in alignment with me as possible, but it's just like not the case. And so I try to stick with, I have like some boundaries in my head, which is like beginner teachers, they have to take my 200-hour if they have like less than 5 years of experience. And if you have more than 5 years of experience, then I'm just checking to see if you're teaching from an authentic place and if you do offer philosophy here and there. And so that's for me. If I have like those, I'm kind of organized in my mind in that way. If like I have those set rules, then I can express really honestly, like, hey,
Yeah.
you got to take my 200-hour, or like let's do a mock and I'll feel into it. And I've had to be really direct with folks of like, this is just the way you teach this isn't in alignment with reunify, but you'd be an amazing teacher somewhere else. So
Yeah.
honesty is how I deal with those kinds of conflicts. And then we've dealt with some way more intense conflicts last year.
Yeah.
um I had an issue where basically I have a friend who they consider themselves non-binary and indigenous, and I
Mm-hmm.
had them hosting a workshop called the Deep Dive, and they were going to call upon a bunch of different teachers from different backgrounds to offer diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And but we advertised the workshop under my friends. Like my friends was the face of it, but
Mm-hmm.
they come off like when you look at a picture of them, they look like a white passing male. And
Mm-hmm.
so I got really big pushback from a student who was like, hey, you have a white man leading a DEIJ workshop? Like, that's fucked up. And
Mm-hmm.
I dealt with it was a big awakening conflict for me because I didn't really realize. I'm like, well, they're not white. They consider themselves indigenous. They consider themselves they, them. But the thing is, like on social media, they look like a white man. So that's super triggering and re-traumatizing for
Mm-hmm.
folks. So that opened up a whole can of worms for me because that student left the studio and then brought a bunch of people with them.
Oof.
And I was just shattered. I was so
Yeah.
broken. Bibs, because like that's just like just not what my vision is, not what my intention was. Like I want to host controversial workshops. Not a lot of yoga studios are down to do DEIJ workshops. So I thought I was
Totally.
doing something different and radical, but instead I was like, of only viewing it from the lens of a white person. I didn't really consider that that was going to be offensive and traumatizing for some folks. So I learned a lot from that situation. And ultimately, what I had to do was I had to have a bunch of individual conversations with everyone involved. And not all of them ended up, a lot of them were like, well, fuck you. Am I allowed to swear on this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A lot
Definitely.
of them were like, well, fuck you, I'm leaving. And, I was in, without letting myself get all wrapped up in my white fragility, I definitely had many a night where I cried that out. But think I learned a lot. I learned a lot from it, and I was very humbled by it. I and it opened up a lot of clear dialogue with my staff about whether they feel safe in all
Hmm.
environments and reunify. And ultimately, that dialogue helped me to create an even safer space for everyone, and help me to understand how I need to move forward with with diversity and inclusion in
Yeah.
reunify space. So yes, there have been conflicts
Yeah.
within the family, and
Damn.
all of them required honesty and vulnerability, and
Hmm.
yeah, just admitting when I was wrong and what I could do better.
Yeah. Damn. Oh my gosh. That sounds so intense. Thank you for sharing about that.
Yeah.
This is, I guess, related. I've been thinking lately about cancel culture, and I don't know. There is a difference between cancel culture, boycotting organizations, just differences in like preferences and all of that. So I guess I shouldn't maybe even use the word cancel culture because what is coming to mind is like I would interpret, and maybe this is my own like whiteness showing, but I would interpret the person who left and like brought people with them as like they essentially like canceled reunify, but maybe that's boycotting. I don't know. I'm like getting my
I don't know
terms
either.
mixed up. But do you, whether we want to call it cancel culture or maybe a safer way to say it is just like the potential for conflict and people leaving because of that conflict since that experience, are you operating differently? Do you find that there's like an added level of, I imagine, awareness, but also like I would be scared? Do you ever feel like fearful of trying new things and putting things out there now?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is an added level. I'm just much more careful,
Yeah.
which I think it is rooted in fear ultimately, because rejection doesn't feel good for any of us, especially when our intention isn't, yeah. So I think it is rooted in fear. I am much more careful, but I would say there were some shifts, but there were some things that we were set on, like which we wanted to continue to offer the Save a Scholarship, which prioritizes applicants from BIPOC folks, and we wanted to continue to include DEIJ work in all of our trainings and everything, including training our staff. So it's not like I was like so scared that I was like, all right, I'm dropping all this. I'm just going to act like every other yoga studio. Um,
Yeah. Right.
I was like, these are still things in alignment with me, and I still have more to learn. And I was very humbled and continue to be humbled. And it's just a lifetime of learning with this work, with all work. And
Mm.
so I would say I'm more careful, but it hasn't stopped us from continuing to look at ourselves and look at the way in which we're supporting unconscious bias.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Well, yeah, I give you so much credit for like continuing to show up authentically, and like being willing to learn through that experience. Yeah, I think that's awesome.
I mean, it's one of the they say moral codes, one of the moral codes of being a yogi, one of the moral codes is svadhyaya. And although it can be seen, which it literally means self-study,
Mm-hmm.
and some people interpret it as like, oh, that means studying the scriptures on your own. And other people interpret it as like, yeah, you have to continuously re-examine yourself and say like, oh, what
Mm-hmm.
could I be doing differently? Because if you're in this stuck way of like perceiving and living, there's never going to be this evolution, this growth. So always open to considering how I could do things differently, what I did wrong, right? Because we're playing these roles of wrong and right in so many different ways in different
Mm-hmm.
people's lives. So thank you for for acknowledging me, but also I feel that it's my duty as a yogi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. I love that. So we talked about like the challenges related to like people to people challenges. We touched on like capitalism, I guess, in the beginning, but the responsibility of the business side, being responsible for like people's livelihood in some ways, like hiring people, has that like played out how you expected? What are some challenges there? Is anything coming to mind?
Yeah. So I was running the business side of things solo till about a few years ago, 2 years ago, I think, halfway. So Reunify's been open 4 years. So I think halfway through is when I hired on my manager. And it has made a huge difference to hire help because it
Mm-hmm.
was so much to carry on my own back. I had to do it because that's all I could afford. But I was very grateful. That was as soon as I could afford hiring someone to help, I hired someone to help and just slowly increase their hours. Like that was necessary for me to still maintain a loving relationship with Reunify rather than having it being this business burden. And then I would say there are some really difficult things to navigate, which is that I'm very close with my staff. Everyone on my staff is my friend and I love them. And so sometimes when there are business conversations to be had, like about raises or about conduct or whatever it is difficult because I want to maintain authenticity. I don't want to immediately go into this businesswoman mode. I want to be like, hey, I love you, but like this needs to shift. Or like, hey, I love you, but we can only afford half that raise or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I would say the business side of things it can feel more emotional than
Mm.
what they would if I was like in a corporation, like managing a bunch of people, like, oh, sorry, this is what we have to do. We have to cut your hours. And so now my heart is involved, which yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's intense. I imagine this is why so many, especially bigger companies, do it, but it's easier to just suddenly make it super corporate and be like, yeah, create distance between yourself and the people you're sharing hard news with, when in reality, if you let yourself, we inherently like care. So I think it's, yeah, it takes like strength to say yes to letting your heart break with other people's if that
Yeah.
happens.
And it's such an important part of the human experience,
Mm-hmm.
and as long as you're letting your heart break with them, like I'm just like I refuse to numb out.
Yeah.
I feel into like what the connection is and what the response is and yeah, which helps me make a lot of my decisions and
Mm-hmm.
keeps me modest, keeps me from getting egotistical or greedy or anything like that because I love these people so much and I'm going to give them everything I can. And
Yeah.
I would never take more for myself than what I need because of that, because I've created that like deep connection.
Yep. Yeah. Such wise words. What's one thing you're learning right now? It doesn't have to be related to reunify.
I'm learning I'm learning detachment because I've had to give up a lot of free time
Mm-hmm.
with the new baby. And yeah, I used to have just like a lot of time to fill up my own cup. I used to have time to surf every day, even practice every day, and there's less of that now. And I'm mourning that. And I think that's what detachment is. I think it's this mourning of the things that we held as our own identity or as our own source. When
Mm-hmm.
that source is truly within ourselves. It's not about the greatest surf session. It's not even about having this perfect asana practice. Like the practice can be me with my child, but I think I'm mourning the old versions of how I navigated this life and finding a new way to navigate it.
Yeah. That's so valid. And so, yeah, that's just so, so real. I imagine I don't have kids.
Yeah.
um, my best friend, my old college roommate, just had her first baby, and we were just talking about it this week, and it's a wild experience of just like constant, it seems constant grief and like amazement and positive things.
Totally.
Not that grief is necessarily negative, but
No.
speaking
Yeah.
of grief, I have never been to one of the like grief and praise circles that are hosted at Reunify because I'm scared, to be honest. I feel like they, along with other experiences you offer in spaces that you hold, I'm sure, I can tell it would just be like probably the most powerful and vulnerable thing like ever. Can you just talk about it and
Yeah.
what inspired you to invite that kind of experience into Reunify?
Yeah. So the woman who hosts it, her name is Sarah Knapp with Gris Elves. And I thought, well, a community does everything together. We
Mm-hmm.
celebrate together, we laugh together, we cry together, we grieve together. And so when I found out through a member at the studio that this woman held these spaces, she used to call them Death Cafe. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, we want it here. We want it
Wow.
here. Like, I think too many people are grieving alone in their own homes and even drowning in their own grief. And I think as humans, we were designed to, and Sarah talks about this all the time, the woman who host these events or these gatherings. And she says, we were made to grieve together. We were made to experience these things together. We once lived in small villages and like mothers didn't have to take care of their kids alone. Everyone was taking care of the kid, but everyone grieved a death in the community together. So
Mm.
that's why. And what they're like is like, it's a lot of weeping. And really beautiful weeping. Sometimes I showed up to them and not even having a recent person to grieve. Uh, and you just weep with other people. You see someone else grieving and you weep, you feel into their heartbreak with them. And it's just,
Mm-hmm.
they feel so good to be seen. I think you feel so good to cry with them because like they're your sibling. They're your earth
Yeah.
sibling. And they also now include, or the reason why they're calling it grief and praise, because they now include some somatic experiencing where you dance and you kind of like move the grief through as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's why, and that's what they look like.
Yeah. It's so cool. I want there to be more spaces like that. I think it's pretty rare. I think there are like support groups where it feels appropriate to like at least cry, but to have that like communal aspect of both grief and praise, I just think it's incredible. So that's like a
Yeah,
challenge to myself is the next time I'm in Ocean Beach, get up the courage to just go.
yeah. It's hard to be vulnerable. You know,
Yeah.
we're told we're supposed to function in society a certain way, so we get used to wearing this mask. And when someone says like you can put the mask down, you're like, I don't trust it. Like, are you going to judge me? Is it actually
Right.
safe to do that? And so it's only natural to feel nervous to go to these types of things because like you're used to playing this role, and it's like, how can I trust that it's safe to set that role down and I can just be
Mm.
a blubbery mess with
Right.
all y'all? And so it takes like developing that connection with reunify and trusting in
Yeah,
the space holders.
definitely. That's huge. Yep. That's so true. Such good reminders. I know we're coming up on time. I feel like we've been doing deeper questions. This is a lighter question. So I want to start asking all of my guests just at the end about an embarrassing story. Do you have any embarrassing yoga stories, whether it's like you teaching or anything
Oh
else?
yeah. Oh
Okay,
yeah, let's do it.
I would love to hear one or any.
Most recently I was leading YTT and I went to demonstrate frog pose, and which is a pretty wide need for those of you who are watching don't practice asana. It's a pretty wide need inner thigh opener, and I went straight into frog pose. And because I've just recently given birth, my pelvic floor is rebuilding its strength, and so it sucked
Mm.
up a ton of air. And then I went to go put my legs
Yes.
back together, and it just like I queefed it very openly, just full blown queef in front of all my students, and I was actually embarrassed, but I just had to own it, be like, look, I just gave birth. Like that's just like what my vagina is doing nowadays
Yes.
during my practice. So I would say that's a more recent embarrassing story. And now every time I'm like going upside down or taking a wide knee pose, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, don't queef, don't queef, don't queef.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of part of my healing right now. So
Totally. That's so real. That's just a human body experience. No escaping the body.
yeah.
That's amazing, though. I love it. Well, I want to be mindful of the time. I guess I'm just going to wrap it up because I always leave these conversations wanting to ask more and make it longer. But I just have to accept it doesn't have to be and it,
The mind is always wanting more, 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 right?
yes, it
Let's dig for
is.
more. Let's dig for more.
Yes. But thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your time today. This has just been so insightful. And I think I actually have a lot of yoga teachers that follow me. And so I think they'll really enjoy this episode in particular. But before I let you go, where can people find you? How can people support you? I would say the majority of my followers aren't in Ocean Beach, but even still would love to hear about like the things you have going on, because you never know where people might be located who are listening.
Cool. Yeah. So you can find me. Our Instagram is reunify yoga, and you can also just go to reunifyyoga.com. We actually have a digital yoga studio, which I started during the pandemic, and I have some people from Chicago who are up on there since I'm from there, and Germany as well. And yeah, we also are a yogi education center. So we have lots of trainings, 200-hour, 300-hour, if you ever want to spend a few months in San Diego, let's go. Come through. This August we're doing one. And you can always reach out to me if I know if someone's subletting their place. I can hook that up for you. Again, connection, community. And
Yes.
that's where you find me.
Amazing. If anyone can take Nikki up on this offer, do it, because Ocean Beach is just such a special place. And obviously, you now know Reunify is as well. But yeah, I literally am like, I need to come back every year. Not need to, I really want to, just because it's so special. Thank you so much again. Thank you for listening to Who Are You and What Are You Doing Here with Nikki Ray Bose as our guest. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As Nikki said, you can find her and Reunify on Instagram at Reunify Yoga. You can also find them online, reunifyyoga.com. If you are in the San Diego area and or if you can be there, I cannot recommend Reunify enough in any capacity that you're able to be there. I think Nikki mentioned they're doing a 300-hour yoga teacher training. It's rooted in a lot of yoga philosophy beyond just asanas. I think it's going to be really different than the teaching you might find at just any old yoga studio. If you work remotely, for example, and are looking for somewhere to spend some time other than where you normally live, San Diego, Ocean Beach in particular, is also like nothing else I've experienced in the States. It's an amazing, amazing spot. Thank you so much again to Nikki for coming on today. Let us know what you thought of the episode. Like, rate, subscribe, comment, follow, all the things. Share it with a friend. That's huge. That is one of the most common ways, if not the most common way, that podcasts grow is simply by word of mouth. So really appreciate you sharing this episode with anybody that you think would enjoy it. Also, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/bibslive. Would so appreciate your support through the Patreon. You can donate as little as $1 or maybe $3 a month. I will leave links to everything that I've mentioned in the show notes. And depending on when I post this, this may actually be the last episode of season 2 of Who Are You and What Are You Doing Here? So thank you for listening to season 2. I'm so grateful that this podcast lives on and has existed for this long. And I hope to see you in a season 3. Thanks for being here. Bye.